Hi there, and welcome to Peninsula Players Presents, the history of Peninsula Players Theatre. Hello, Audie. How are you today?
Hi, Greg. I'm feeling chipper.
Oh, okay, good. I'm a little bit too, and I know we've talked about before. We've talked about should we wear costumes for these things or change things up. But today, I thought I'd put this on because well, we just entered a very positive time
Mm-hmm.
in the theater's history, so we're celebrating that.
Exactly.
So yeah, so just a little bit of review. So we're in 1961, and on February 11th, there was a public auction of the theater, and Kenneth Carode, a New York tax attorney, made the winning bid. And Jim McKenzie, along with his wife Jean Boland, became the producers. And we started a new era where people were brought in who had a lot of theater experience. There was more organization, and the goal was to remain fiscally responsible and organized so that we didn't go through any of the travails that we just went through the last few years. So as we go into prepping for the upcoming season, I think there was an article May 29th in 1961 about that the June 30th was going to be the opening date.
June 30th was going to be the opening date, and some people were arriving early, as they continue to do, to prepare the grounds and prepare the buildings and everything else. And this particular year, it was a lot to be done. And that's because for the past 2 years, what we hadn't talked about was the neglect the gardens had. And because of the financial situation, it was more what was immediate and what bills needed to be paid. And so a lot of the gardens didn't survive. And there was just a lot of repairs and replanting that needed to be done. And also building maintenance. So a lot of that was occurring up until the beginning of the season. So Tom Connors, who was a young man from Sturgeon Bay who was an intern in previous years and the house manager, helped arrive early, and he has a very much interest in horticulture. And so he's helping to plant the grounds along with Jean Boland, who arrives early, and they're both out there beautifying things and making a few shifts and changes as well to the property.
And in charge of this there was a new general manager, Ben Tarver, who arrived early.
There was, and he had massive credentials of running other summer stocks in other parts of the country, from New Mexico to also working with the University of New York's drama department. So.
And we had a new PR manager, Monty L. Fearson, who also came in early.
He did, and he was originally from Oklahoma. So we've got this nice mix of people from across the country coming in to help lead.
Which continues on today, people from all over the place. So they did a renovation in the theater with some new equipment.
They got some new lighting equipment and other things, and I think even some new chairs for the patrons. And there was a bit of stuff to do around the grounds, and they really wanted to reflect Mother Nature. They really wanted the grounds themselves to be simplistic and welcoming to patrons. So I guess apparently there had been a lot of soda signs around property. So they had removed some of those. And Tom Connors was photographed building an extra concession stand in the far garden. So patrons could go out in two different directions from the pavilion and get refreshments at that time.
I also read that this was the first time that the theater got a beer license.
They did, but I'm not sure they did. And okay. I say that because we had a conversation with an intern from that year, Tom, who recalls Jean sending him to the town to get the liquor license because he was the only Wisconsin resident on staff, because everybody else had come from all over, and the town said no. And they denied him that. And I'm not sure they got a beer license. I know there's
Hmm.
some ways where you could get a liquor license is one thing and a beer license is another. And I know it's advertised that they have a beer license, but I'm not positive they got one.
It's part of the magic of researching,
Yes.
and sometimes the accuracy or inaccuracy of the reporting that's done.
Right, because they do advertise it. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, but,
But I just want to assure our patrons that we do have a liquor license now.
yes.
So yeah,
So
come on
we can
down.
sell it. And so yes.
Yes. So another project that was happening was the lodge.
Yes, and part of the damage, what had happened was there was some vandalism done to the property over that winter,
Hmm.
and the lodge either suffered from a fire or excessive snowfall that collapsed the roof in.
Mhm.
And so they used that as an opportunity. So some of the investments that the Kenneth Corrode Group are doing are investing in the structure of building this new lodge. And Tom, the intern that I mentioned, also recalls one of his first jobs when he arrived on property was to help use some of the old wood and clean it so that they can use it to build the scenery that year. So they were being fiscally responsible, starting even like repurposing before repurposing
Right.
was a
Yeah.
word.
And also to remind our listeners that the lodge that they're replacing was the one that was used by the Wildwood Camp for Boys back in the 20s and 30s.
20s,
So that was
exactly, yes. So when I give some backstage tours, I always point out the chimney, because the chimney is really the only thing that remained from that original lodge.
Mhm.
So in 1961, they had the plan and the big Bayview windows that are there. And they have plans to use this after the shows for patrons. They expand the kitchen. So there's an additional kitchen space for the cooks to prepare the meals for the company during the day. But then in the evening, that space is going to become something interesting for patrons.
Indeed, which we'll talk about. And they're calling it the Bayview Lodge Supper Club. Very classy. So, and then on June 1st, the shows and the schedule is announced.
They do. And it's all very exciting lineup because of Jim's connection being out east and being a producer of two different theaters. He's the general manager at the Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey and the Westport Country Playhouse in Connecticut. And so he has some of these connections, and he talks to the right holders, and he's able to get some things fresh off of Broadway before they're even released to summer stocks out east. So Peninsula Players really gets to do premieres and maybe even some pre-Broadway tryouts as we continue to move forward. Jim continues to use these connections throughout the rest of the decades. So
yeah, and yes, even that continued on when you and I got there, and it was always very exciting, to be able to do
was,
that.
yes, it was. And so he's got some exciting stuff coming up for this season. And
so as they're going into the season, there's some, again, as Audie said, some really talented people coming in, like Charles Rome Smith.
Yes, a very talented young director who, prior to that, he was in the Broadway debut of Three Penny Opera, and he performed throughout the entire run of that show with Charlotte Rae and B. Arthur and everybody else who was in that cast. So, and we're going to go on and talk about him too later.
Indeed. And Kip Cohen was become the production coordinator. And Caroline is listed as a theater advisor, but she doesn't travel at all.
She doesn't travel, and I don't think she's able to. I think her health is still, that leg abscess has, I think, made her a little immobile. And so she's still resting at home.
And I think probably feeling more comfortable that everything is in good hands.
Yes. Yeah. And especially with the Mackenzies, knowing Jim and Jean are on hand.
And now you mentioned that Jean was there the whole season, though she didn't act, and that Jim he helped start everything, but he wasn't present either.
He wasn't. He may have come out to see an opening or two to see how things were going, but he had his hands in other pies and other theater venues and other ventures. And so he was occupied with that. So once he got things lined up and he hired his support team, he hired the best people he could find and trusted them and let them do their jobs.
And so we had mentioned Ben Tarver was the general manager, but he actually ended up leaving just before the season.
He did. Just before the season starts, something in New York came up, and he and his wife, who was supposed to choreograph the musical that we were going to be doing, left. So yes, we're doing a musical.
First time we've done reviews, but not musicals.
Yes.
And so Monty Frierson stepped in as general manager.
And Jim found the PR man from the Coconut Playhouse in Miami Beach, Charles Cinnamon, to come up and do the PR for the summer.
And Charles, just so you know, was on our National Advisory Council just until, he passed away a few years ago.
Yep.
Yeah. Stayed connected.
He did.
So the season 1961 opens on June 30th with the pleasure of his company, and it ran for 2 weeks.
It was scheduled for 2 weeks. I'm not sure if it was it was for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
for 2 weeks.
And there was a review on stage because the lodge wasn't ready yet.
Right. So when Greg says a review, it's not a review of the show. They assembled, Jim or Jean or someone found a group of Northwestern students who were involved in a review on campus, and they brought them up to perform after the plays each evening, an original review that the student, Jim Rusk, a graduate of Northwestern, would assemble. Now as a graduate, he wants to be a musical composer. So he's putting together these reviews along with Nancy Pretty, Bruce Hyde. There's performers within that, but the lodge isn't ready yet. So they're performing this review on the stage after the show. And
I read in one of the articles, the writer talked about it went till midnight. So they do the show in the evening and then the review.
Right.
And then on July 2nd, there's an article in the Milwaukee Journal and about new look is offered by Peninsula Players. And there's a quote from Jean Boland, I think, which is pretty nice.
It is.
It says, Miss Boland left her 3 children at home in Westport, Connecticut, to help the Peninsula Playhouse get started.
And she said, this, referring to the Playhouse, is the baby that needs burping the most right now. Resident summer stock theater is fading from the American scene, she said. Everything is turning into a packaged star house. There has to be a place for other actors to learn. The quality of theater is going to drop unless we can build talent. This is one of the few summer stock theaters left, and I don't think the people of Wisconsin know what they have here.
And this was Jim and Jean's belief from the beginning of their involvement with the theater, and that's continued today. They were called apprentices back then. We call them interns right now, and we continue to try to help develop and support new talent and offer them connections in the professional world, and that's been very gratifying.
It has
for
been.
Everyone involved. So going on with the season, then July 11th, a show called Not in the Book opened, which was, as you mentioned, one of the pre-Broadway tryouts.
It was, and it was billed that way and performed. And then after the performance, was when the Party Liners then got to open in the brand new Bayview Lodge Supper Club, which was billed with having sandwiches and refreshments afterwards. So Vivian was back in the kitchen for the year, and she was also supervising making these sandwiches and preparing them for this evening fare as well. And Jim Rusk would organize the reviews, and one that was performed was that he had organized was called Follow the Leader. And that particular production is one that he goes on to win a $1,000 award for. So in himself wanting to be a composer and playwright, he entered this competition that was sponsored by BMI, Broadcast Musical International, and he won the Cabaret Review Award that year. So it was the inaugural year of this scholarship fund. Mm-hmm. And he continues to go on. So when he wins the award, he is then also working in New York at that time. He leaves Peninsula Players after having come up with original reviews for every show after every show. So there's 9 shows in this season, and he's composing original work or pulling together music songs from different musicals, and they're rehearsing with the Party Liner cast, as well as them rehearsing shows that they're involved in during the day.
And he's playing for all.
And he's playing for all of them. Yeah, he's also a pianist, so he's composing songs. And it's really, and he has been his entire life. He's been performing. He was interested in entertaining since he was 11 years old in Kansas City. He, at Northwestern, submitted 35 different songs to the musical review committee, 5 of which made it into the WAMU musical review that Northwestern does every year. Mm-hmm. And then this particular one, Follow the Leader, went on to win this award, and he continues to grow his career. And we paused for a moment to talk about Jim Rusk because I'm just fascinated by him.
Well, he had quite a career.
He does. And while he's in New York, he's also traveling he becomes involved with a cabaret review there called Upstairs. Is it the Upstairs at the Downstairs? The Downstairs at the Upstairs? I get it.
Upstairs at the Downstairs.
Thank you. I get it looped in my head sometimes. But at this cabaret comedy club, there's up and coming comics working there, such as Madeleine Kahn and Ruth Buzzy. And then, so there's another cabaret in Detroit. So he goes to Detroit for a little while, and he's working at a cabaret there, and he becomes friends with an upstart there called Lily Tomlin. And when Lily Tomlin moves to New York, she then gets involved with the Upstairs at the Downstairs and with Jim Rusk. She says he's a funny guy, one of the funniest guys I've ever known. And she bounces ideas off of him all of the time for sketches and things. A couple years later, Lily is at the Downstairs at the Upstairs. She was the opening act for Mabel Mercer, who's a cabaret artist that had a huge influence on Frank Sinatra. And she didn't know what to do. Well, her friend Jim had been chiding her for a while and suggesting, the telephone operators in New York are really bad and have really bad service. Why don't you do a sketch about them? And she would think, no, that sounds just a little too cliche. I'm not so interested in it. Finally, he writes her a script and gives her a monologue to present. And so she prepares for this. And this is how Ernestine comes about. So Ernestine, the telephone operator that I adored on Laugh-In and Sesame Street, so much so that I've told Greg this story numerous times while we were preparing for this. I would bend hangers, put them on my head to make a headset, and talk to people. So, probably why I like backstage work. I get to put that headset on and talk to people.
I didn't know that, Audie. I hope you're still not doing that.
Well, only when I'm in the office and I actually have a headset now to put on. That's real. So
yeah, so that's pretty cool that Jim Rusk was involved in the beginning of that part of Lily Tomlin's career.
Right, and he continued to be so. He was a virtuoso, being a composer, a writer, and a songsmith, and he worked on her TV specials as a writer, and he ended up receiving 2 Emmy Awards with the entire writing team for her TV specials on comedy. And he just continued to work in the cabaret industry as long as he could. And it was just, he had a really fascinating career, and even wrote a novelty song that might still be played today, that's on called The Pretty Little Dolly. And it's a Santa song. A little girl wants a dolly, but it has very comedic lyrics to it. And it was on the Johnny Carson's show at one point in time.
Yes. I'm not sure if I want to recommend listening to it. You can find it on YouTube, but it's pretty silly.
Yep.
But so that was Jim Rusk, who passed through Peninsula Players the summer of '61. One of many talented people that did them. So, and then also at the same time, speaking of people passing through the Players, on July 14th, Madeleine Turtilo, who is with the Peninsula Art School and has performed at Peninsula Players.
And tried to purchase the place.
Tried to purchase the place, yes, at the auction at the beginning of the year in February. But she was also a filmmaker, and she had a film premiere.
She did, and it was one that she had worked on the year before on property at the Peninsula Players. And she's called it A Simple Story of a Cute Chick Being Chased by Two Cool Cats.
Yes. And it was called Second Summer. So that was another interesting side note that happened that season. And then we continue on with the season with the next show, which was called The Marriage Go Around, which opened July 18th. And that had an interesting actress in it.
It did. They brought in a ringer. They brought in a statuesque model from California called Gloria Victor, who had done a couple of films prior to that. And Charlie Cinnamon, using his spin, said a 6 foot tall, statuesque gal, but I think she only rang in at like 5'9", 5'11". So,
but with heels, yeah.
With heels, right? Maybe 6 feet. So, but there she was, and that was part of the storyline, was having a very pretty gal on there. So Gloria was with us for a week.
Yes, and she was very camera friendly.
Yes.
Yes. And then we went on to 10 Nights in a Barroom, which opened July 25th. And I think the audience was asked.
They were asked to boo. So the articles coming out in advance says, please, this is a little audience participation for this one. Boo the villain. Boo.
Fun. And then we get to an interesting show, Period of Adjustment by Tennessee Williams, which opened August 1st. And that was, I believe, a Midwest premiere prior to a national tour.
Right. Jim's using his connections and either meeting with Tennessee Williams himself or his people who have his rights, was able to say, hey, can we do this for a week in Fish Creek before it goes out on national tour? And they were like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Where's Fish Creek? Okay. Which I think Jim heard a lot of.
Indeed, we are up there in the woods.
Yes, and I think the greatest compliment that this whole season, Sidney Harris from the Chicago Trib came up to see it, and he just called it a slickly professional production, and nothing but praise for the performers. And I think that was the largest improvement, was just how well everything was now being organized in comparison to the chaos of the past 2 years, that everybody was excited to see things a little more polished, maybe not just the performances, but also the scenery and the costumes, because they had people who were specifically doing that job. And it wasn't just the company saying, okay, this is your turn to do it this week, and it's your turn to do it this week. It was something consistent, show after show.
And it was nice that for quite a long time, Sidney Harris would review the shows in the Chicago paper, and he had a summer home up in Door County.
He did.
Yep. Yeah. So the next show is Invitation to a March, which opens August 8th. And it is, again, a Midwest premiere, and includes an actress from the area.
Yes, from the Green Bay area, they bring up Mary Gage, and she's done a lot of work in that. And I remember the highlight that stuck out in my mind was she was going to be performing the production with blue hair, and so it's like, okay, I need to read this script because I need to know if this is
Why?
the context of the
Yeah,
show.
I've done a lot of changes to my looks performing on stage, but blue hair hasn't been one of them yet. And also in the far garden, there was a wishing well.
There was. They again were supporting the community, the Dark County Memorial Hospital Auxiliary Fund. And so Jeanette Leahy was there posed with a sign, and along with the chairperson, who was Mrs. Harris. So the two of them were encouraging patrons to leave their change in the far garden pond to go towards the auxiliary fund for the hospital. And then there's a few publicity shots too of patrons doing just that. And it was nice to see that they were still trying to support the community in that way.
And going on with the season, a majority of one opened August 15th. Under the Yum Yum Tree opened August 22nd. And there was a promotion that Charles Cinnamon worked on for that.
He did. So Charles Cinnamon, with his suave PR ways, when he moved to Florida, in addition to working at the Coconut Playhouse, prior to that, he was the PR man for a string of hotels in Florida. And so he worked out this deal where the ushers would pass out promotional material for the hotels every night to patrons, and patrons each night, so performances of 6 different winners were going to win a week's stay at a hotel in Miami Beach who attended that performance. So that was a very unique setup, and I don't think anything we'd ever done again after that, but it was just really kind of nice to see the two different two different tourist areas. And I really still think there is a strong connection to this day between Door County and Florida. I know there's a lot of residents who move from one place to the other.
But don't call us about a week in Florida. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Sorry. And then we come to the last show of the season, which opened August 29th and went to September 3rd, Once Upon a Mattress, which was
our first musical, and it was so exciting. So we have done musicals in the past where they were original and reviews, but this is the first full-fledged musical that Peninsula Players does that's pre-scripted and arrives. So they bring in a choreographer from New York to do the choreography. Kip Cohen, who's been the stage manager most of the season, is now also the musical director, and he has and that's his education. He has not only just a theater background, but also music. Mm-hmm. So, and we're going to discuss that a little bit more later too.
And it was a large cast.
I found the cast of 40 very fascinating. And I was like, how did they do that? So they reached out to community members, including Mary Jane Sorgel, who was running a dance school in Sturgeon Bay, and got some of her students to come up for some of the scenes and the children who were within there. Mary Jane is a local Door County icon. She's best known as the majorette for the Packers at this current time. So she's won a national baton twirling competition, and she's leading the band to the Packer games and becomes really good friends with Vince Lombardi. And Vince asks her to create a cheerleading squad. And so in 1961, the year that we're featuring here, is the first year that the Golden Girls, the cheerleaders, appear at Packer games, and Mary Jane is considered the original Golden Girl. And she runs her dance studio and brought some of these lovely children to be part of the production of Once Upon a Mattress. And
well, that's how we could do such a big show.
Yes.
Although that helped.
Yeah. And it was very well received, and tickets were being very well sold, and they expanded the shows. They were doing 2 performances on Saturday and 2 performances on Sunday. And it was very colorful, very bouncy, very happy. celebratory type of show, and that everybody really, really enjoyed it quite a bit.
And it was a great way to end the season.
It was a great, on a high note, exactly. And Jeanette Leahy played the queen. Bill Munchausen was the silent father, and Bruce Hyde, who was part of the Party Liners, was the prince. And everybody got a really was well received in their roles. And as I said, it was very colorful. And I have to thank Denise, Jeanette's daughter, for sending in a couple of color photos, because everything we have in our archives from that time period was black and white. So thanks, Denise, for sending me those. It's great to share with everybody.
And we're always grateful for Friends of the Theater when they do that. It's terrific. So we get at the end of the season, and the paper says it was 1961 was a big success.
It was, and it was really a nice thing to say that they, a tremendous comeback, and within that, and they were kind of summarizing everything to say that 27 different players received a credit or accolades for their different roles in different parts that season, and that the productions were above par, that they were just stunningly and spectacularly well, and that everything was ending up on a high note. So
great. And the Wishing Well did pretty good at the end.
They did. They earned $20.50 for the auxiliary fund that year.
From the change in the well.
The change, yes.
So we get to the end of the season. It went great. And we wanted to speak, last but not least, about a local person who was working that season at the Players, Stuart Hedman.
Yes, and he was another graduate of Sturgeon Bay High School who was interested in the theater and performing there. And he also went to Northwestern, and he had received the Northwestern's Most Promising Theater Student Award while he was there. And he was to come and design all of the scenery for Peninsula Players that summer of '61. And there's these articles that are running in the paper about his arrival, and he's also the son of a local doctor. So it was really exciting to have a local student and prominent there. Well, Stuart's career continued to launch after Peninsula Players as well, and it went more into direction mode. And it was very exciting. While he was at Northwestern, he graduated, but then he returned to work on his master's degree. And while he was there, he got interested in making a film documentary with another student, and it won an award. And it won a local Midwest Film Documentary Award. It went on to Hollywood, where it won an award in Hollywood. And he got to sit at this table with George Burns and Groucho Marx and all of these other stellar Hollywood performers at this guild while he went to receive this award. And along with the award was the opportunity to work at a Hollywood studio for 2 years or a year. So he goes and he's sitting there learning filmmaking. And finally he gets to put together the trailer for a Rock Hudson movie. Is like one of the first things he accomplishes. And while he's doing that, he meets another director named John Urey, who does commercials. And he becomes interested in that. And so he starts directing commercials for very prominent companies. And eventually, especially ones for Kodak, there's one that he did that was very storytelling, and how he told those Kodak moments of Venice. And it caught the eye of television directors or television producers. And so they brought him in to do and direct television programs for Mission Impossible and Mannix and a couple other things. And then he was directed a television TV movie with Desi Arnaz Jr. And he got to direct a feature film with Jacqueline Bisset. And there was another one that he won the Cannes Film Festival Jury Award for, which was Strawberry Statement in 1970. And then he continues his career in making commercials. He really finds that trying to tell the story in that short span of time is what sparks his interest in to maintain a story for commercials. And I found out he won in the 80s, when the Directors Guild of Television started giving awards for those who directed commercials. He was one of the first people to win the award, not just once, but twice, for his various commercials, including one that I remember is where Charlie Chaplin and the IBM commercial, where he's roller skating around really quickly through trying to get his job done, and how IBM, the computer, can help ease the process of all of that. So, and he's, as far as I know, I think he's still directing and still making these great commercials. And
another person who came through Fish Creek and the Players,
and our county,
and we'd like to take complete credit for everything he did, but I think he was on his way anyway.
Yes, yes. And that really is, it's really supportive, because that's what, even with Caroline and passed on through Jim and Jean, is, and as we've mentioned before, building up young talent and giving them their footing and giving them their connections. And we're going to meet some more of those
coming up. Yes, who have new talent that goes on to have amazing careers, even more than some of these. It's very exciting. So thank you, Audie, for going through that. And please come back, and we will look at all these new people coming in next time. So take care and see you then.